When most people think of World War I, they picture the muddy trenches of France and Belgium. But in the east, a massive disaster was unfolding that pushed the Russian Empire to the edge of collapse. This was the Great Retreat of 1915, a catastrophe that changed the fate of Eastern Europe. At the start of the war in 1914, Russia quickly invaded East Prussia and Galicia. Russian leaders hoped to crush Germany from the east, while France and Britain fought in the west. For a moment, it looked possible, but by the spring of 1915, the situation had turned. Germany and Austria-Hungary launched the Görlitz-Tarnów offensive. The Allies had modern artillery, heavy machine guns, and plenty of supplies. The Russian army, although huge, was running out of rifles, shells, boots, and even food. Many soldiers wanted to fight, but they simply did not have the weapons to win. On May 1915, the retreat began. This was not just a small withdrawal, it soon became one of the largest retreats in modern history. Russian forces abandoned entire regions, giving up Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Belarus. Soldiers and civilians fled east, hoping to find safety. But there was no real plan, and no way to coordinate such a massive movement. There was also no safe place to go. The front lines were moving, and nobody knew where the next battle would be. Russian commanders ordered the army to destroy everything they couldn't carry with them. So as they pulled back, they followed a scorched earth policy. They destroyed railroads, factories, and crops, so nothing would be left for the enemy. But this also meant hundreds of thousands of civilians were forced from their homes. Families marched east with the army, facing hunger and misery. Men, women, and children huddled together for warmth at night, begging for something to eat during the day. Along the way, they encountered German troops and had to flee through forests and swamps. Some found work in labor battalions, building new roads or repairing old ones. Others joined partisan groups, sabotaging supply lines or harassing German troops. Still, others simply hid in villages, trying to survive on their own. The choices were limited, and all of them were dangerous. You either stayed with the retreating army, became a refugee, joined a partisan group, or tried to hide in place. Each choice carried a high price, but most people didn't have a choice at all. The soldiers and civilians who stayed with the army faced starvation. Food supplies were scarce, and the logistics system was in chaos. Hunger became widespread. The soldiers who stayed behind to fight continued to suffer defeats. Soon, entire units simply disappeared. Sometimes they were overwhelmed by German forces. Other times they were trapped behind enemy lines with no way out. Russian commanders desperately tried to stop the rot, but they lacked the resources to help anyone. Communications were cut, reinforcements were gone, and the soldiers who stayed behind were doomed. Meanwhile, the civilians who tried to hide in place faced the wrath of the German occupation. As German troops advanced, they took control of major cities like Warsaw, Vilnius, and Riga. People across the empire suddenly found themselves living under a new government. The Germans divided conquered territories into two zones, military and civilian. The military zone was heavily guarded and controlled directly by the army. Civilians lived under the authority of the civilian zone. While the German occupation was brutal everywhere, it was especially bad in the areas most affected by fighting. People there suffered from food shortages, disease outbreaks, and the constant threat of violence. Those who resisted the occupation risked arrest, torture, or execution. Most people had no choice but to comply. They paid their taxes, followed the rules, and hoped that the war would end soon. In reality, it would be 3 long years before the fighting stopped. All across the Eastern Front there was mass desertion. Soldiers simply refused to fight for an army that was clearly losing. Deserters left the front in large numbers, heading home or to safer areas in the rear. Some joined underground organizations, smuggling food and medicine to those in need. Others went to work in factories, producing supplies for the war effort. Still, others simply vanished. Nobody knows how many Russian soldiers deserted, but the number was likely very high. By the end of the retreat, Russia had lost around 2 million soldiers killed, wounded, or captured. Entire units simply disappeared. Civilians suffered as well. Hundreds of thousands died from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. As the retreat dragged on, more and more people began to wonder if the war could ever be won. The army had given up entire regions, the economy was in sharp decline, and the government seemed unable to do anything about it. The Great Retreat of 1915 was a disaster on every level. It shattered the myth of the invincible Russian army, shook confidence in the government, and set the stage for the collapse of the empire. There were some positive results. The retreat forced the Russians to regroup and rebuild their forces. They learned valuable lessons about the dangers of overconfidence and the importance of preparation. But these victories were overshadowed by the terrible cost. After the retreat, the war went on for another 3 years. Russia lost many more soldiers, and the empire itself would eventually fall apart. Today, the Great Retreat of 1915 is often overshadowed by the famous battles of the Western Front like Verdun and the Somme. But it was just as important. It reshaped the Eastern Front, devastated entire regions, and set Russia on the path to revolution. It showed that in war, a defeat can sometimes be more powerful than a victory. This was the story of Russia's Great Retreat of 1915.